Pushes for victory as India holds firm on the final day of the third cricket test at the SCG. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ros Childs. The coronavirus lockdown in Greater Brisbane will end this evening after Queensland recorded no new local cases overnight. Here's reporter Michael Rennie in Brisbane.
People in Queensland and in Brisbane, the 2 million people that live in Brisbane and the Greater Brisbane area, because that lockdown, it was harsh over the weekend, and certainly people's movements was restricted, and the face mask, that was something that people were getting used to, and just a harsh lockdown overall was very harsh on business as well, and particularly businesses here in the Queen Street Mall, which have already been suffering significantly because of the COVID and because of the COVID outbreak. But really good news to hear that we will have some easing of the restrictions, although masks will still need to be worn for the next 10 days at indoor venues and some cases outdoor as well. Of course, this all stems after a quarantine cleaner, a hotel quarantine worker, tested positive to the UK strain of the coronavirus and was in the community for 5 days. And 70% more infectious, that strain of the disease. So look, the authorities here not taking any chances with this, even though we've had 0 cases over the weekend, and they're hoping the 0 cases, locally acquired cases, will continue, that we won't see any locally acquired cases pop up. But they still have concerns that some people need to come forward. A lot of contact tracing already done, but they'd like to see a little bit more. Like to see more people come forward. If you do think you were in one of those areas where this woman had been, and all those details are on the Queensland Government website. But the police overall say that over the weekend people were very compliant overall, and were wearing the masks, were doing the right thing, were not leaving their neighbourhoods, and so good to see that. And I think they'll be hoping that people continue that over the next 10 days, and then things can basically get back to normal, Ros, as they were before. Queensland was enjoying some of the lowest restrictions anywhere in the country.
Definitely not an overreaction. It was absolutely supported by AHPPC. It was supported by National Cabinet, and as you have seen, it has been supported by people in Greater Brisbane. They have absolutely done everything that we have asked them, and they have seen the results today.
Some restrictions, though, will remain in place, as you said, Michael. Is it just masks that are staying?
Oh no, there's some other ones coming in as well. Look, just on the masks, I'll take you through some of the rules that have been put in place. So masks must be worn in indoor places, including shopping centres and workplaces where you cannot socially distance. They must be carried with you at all times, and are not required to be worn when outdoors at a safe distance. Now at pubs and clubs as well, you don't need to wear a mask while you're indoors if you're drinking or eating. So that's a bit of a difference in the rules there. With businesses and venues, 1 person per 4 square metres. For outdoors, it's 1 person per 2 square metres. And seated eating and drinking only, so we're going back to that as well. In terms of gatherings, you can have up to 20 people in homes and in public spaces. Weddings up to 100, and there's no restrictions on dancing, and funerals up to 100 as well. And you can, of course, get all the detail, more detail of that on the Queensland Government website. So I think mostly people in Brisbane are used to these rules already. I think the one everyone's going to have to get used to is wearing the mask.
All right, Michael in Brisbane, thank you. The Northern Territory Government has revoked its hotspot declaration for Greater Brisbane. People arriving from the Brisbane, Ipswich, Logan, Moreton Bay and Redland local council areas will no longer have to undergo mandatory quarantine upon arrival. Staying in the Territory, and Darwin's Howard Springs quarantine facility will soon accept 850 international arrivals a fortnight under a new agreement between the federal and the NT governments. Reporter Nicholas Hines has more.
The Northern Territory Government announced that it's revoked the coronavirus hotspot declaration for Greater Brisbane, which means anyone here at the Howard Springs quarantine facility who's travelled from Brisbane over the weekend will now be free to leave and enter the Northern Territory. That hotspot declaration was made on Friday after the positive case of the UK strain of coronavirus was detected in Brisbane, prompting the lockdown over the weekend.
And Nick, on Friday, the federal government announced it would halve the number of international arrivals coming into New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia. Why is the NT able to accept more arrivals?
Yes, Ros, the Northern Territory is in a bit of a unique position here at Howard Springs. We have a large isolated facility where we're able to quarantine people on the outskirts of Darwin. And that means that while states such as New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia have slashed their international arrivals numbers due to the concerns around the UK strain of coronavirus, the Northern Territory health authorities are confident that they're able to continue safely managing the quarantine program here. So the federal government announced yesterday there is a new agreement between the federal and NT governments, which will see an extra 250 arrivals each fortnight here at Howard Springs.
And that facility there is used to quarantine both international and domestic arrivals. How's that managed?
Yeah, there is some community concern about the potential for spread here because essentially the Howard Springs quarantine facility is split in half. Any domestic travellers caught out by interstate lockdowns or hotspots, such as those from Brisbane over the weekend, are kept on a domestic side, which is managed by the Northern Territory government, while those repatriated Australians coming here through the federal government's program are managed by the National Critical Care and Trauma Response Centre. Now, it's unclear just how they will ensure this increased capacity doesn't affect the overall logistical management of the facility, but the federal government did say that they've taken that into consideration in making this expansion, as well as mitigating for other potential emergencies. Of course, here in the top end, there is a chance we could see a cyclone over the next few months. The federal government says all of that has been taken into account here.
Nick, thanks. 3 new community cases of COVID-19 have been reported in New South Wales today, and a patient who presented to a hospital west of Sydney after the reporting period has also tested positive. State political reporter Ashley Raper has more.
A man in his 40s went to the emergency department at the Mount Druitt Hospital late on Saturday night. Now, he had symptoms of COVID-19 and he was tested, and that test has come back positive. And then his wife, who was at home, she wasn't at the ED, she has also been found to have the virus. Now, this situation is causing a concern for 2 reasons. First, that this man sat in the emergency department for quite some time before he was seen. So there is concern about potential exposure in the emergency department. The authorities have shut the emergency department in Mount Druitt for deep cleaning, and I believe it's about to reopen or has reopened in the past hour or half an hour. Now, the second reason that this is causing concern is that they don't know how this pair contracted the virus. At this stage, they can't link it to the Baralla cluster in Western Sydney or any so far. So there's a lot of contact tracing going on right now. The pair are being interviewed, and they're also looking at the potential exposure at the emergency department. So a lot of work at the moment is being done around these 2 cases in Mount Druitt.
So take us through the detail of today's numbers, Ashley.
Yes, these 2 cases in Mount Druitt aren't actually included in the official numbers. So officially we have 3 new cases of coronavirus in New South Wales, and the 3 are linked to the Baralla cluster, which originated in the bottle shop there in that suburb in Western Sydney. Now, the 3 cases, they're all members of the same family, a man, a woman and a child, and they believe that they caught the virus having dinner with another couple who were cases that were revealed yesterday. So it's good news that obviously that the cases today are linked to the Baralla cluster, but in bad news, look, that there is a transmission still occurring in the community, and the Premier Gladys Berejiklian has just reminded the community that we still need to be vigilant and still follow the quite tight restrictions here in Greater Sydney at this point in time.
I appreciate very much the critical phase of the pandemic we're in. New South Wales, under the circumstances, is doing relatively well, but we are in the phase of mopping up. We are in the phase of really trying to identify any community transmission that hasn't been previously detected, to make sure that any chains which exist in the community, which we hadn't picked up before, have been and are being picked up.
There were 18,000 tests done in New South Wales over the past 24 hours. Authorities are not happy with those numbers. They need them to be at least 25,000, 30,000 a day. So the government is again making an appeal to people to come home and testing at what they're saying is a critical, pivotal time to try and mop up and ensure that we, strive here in New South Wales for no community transmissions, Ros.
Ashley, thank you. Victoria has recorded another day with no new locally acquired coronavirus cases, and it comes as the state government considers whether to reopen its border with New South Wales. Reporter Beth Gibson has the details.
It's another positive day in Victoria with the Department of Health reporting zero new locally acquired cases, and that's the fifth day in a row that Victoria's had no new cases. There's one case in hotel quarantine, and with a total number of 40 active cases in the state. But we do know that there are still thousands of Victorians stuck in New South Wales and in Queensland due to those two border closures. The Victorian government has flagged that they are likely to provide an update on those border closures later today. So there are many Victorians pretty eager to hear when they'll be able to come home from those two states.
We understand, Beth, that the New South Wales Premier has taken another swipe at the Victorian government over the border closure.
That's right. So it's a bit of an ongoing tit for tat. So yesterday, Gladys Berejiklian effectively accused the Victorian government of failing to let her know before making that decision to close the border. Victorian government came back saying that he was having daily phone calls with his New South Wales counterpart. And then this morning, Gladys has said that yes, there are daily phone calls, but she would have liked some input into that decision. And she made broader statements that all states should be doing better with communication around borders because they are decisions that impact thousands and thousands of people's lives.
Beth, thank you. WA's border with Queensland will remain closed for now, with Premier Mark McGowan saying his state will be cautious in its decision-making. Here's reporter Jacob Kagi in Perth.
Well, WA is staying shut to Queensland, and it's likely to do so for a little while yet. The Premier says that until Queensland authorities are absolutely certain that there's no spread of the virus with the community, within that community, WA will be staying shut to Queensland. Now, in the past, the threshold has been for WA to reopen a closed border has been 28 days of no community spread in that particular state. There is some openness on WA's behalf, though, to open before that threshold, given there's only been one confirmed case in Queensland. That will still be a little way away, though. The Premier says that with restrictions continuing in some form in Brisbane for the next 10 days or so, that he would think it's quite unlikely that WA would reopen to Queensland within that time.
In terms of Western Australia's approach to Queensland, we'll get health advice on what the appropriate course is. I do note that Brisbane is going to go through a further 10 days of restrictions, mask wearing, 4 square metre rule, restrictions on the number of people attending sporting events and the like. So I wouldn't expect we'd take any action before Queensland is sure they don't have community spread of the virus. But at the end of that point in time, we'll get further health advice.
Jacob, what about other states that WA is closed to?
Well, WA is currently still closed to New South Wales and Victoria. For New South Wales, that will continue indefinitely. That 28-day threshold of no cases is likely to apply, and of course there are still cases being picked up in the New South Wales community, so at the very least WA's 4 weeks away from reopening to New South Wales, likely longer. In the case of Victoria, they've now had a few days in a row of no cases. The Premier says that it'll take likely a bit more than 4 weeks of 0 cases in that period for WA to consider reopening to them.
Thanks, Jacob. Australian politicians are raising concerns about social media companies banning US President Donald Trump from using sites such as Twitter and Facebook. The decision was made after the US Capitol was stormed by violent protesters. And here in Australia, the move has sparked debate about whether social media companies should have the power to stop people from using their platforms. Stephanie Boris has more from Parliament House.
Their decision was based on what we saw at the US Capitol last week when Trump supporters stormed the building, those horrific scenes we saw of people bashing down windows and doors, police being attacked as well. Now, what led to that was the fact that US President Donald Trump has been declaring and questioning the outcome of the US presidential election, questioning the validity of those votes which saw him lose. Now, there has been no truth to the claims that Donald Trump has made, but despite that, he's continued with with his narrative. And last week he held a rally with supporters nearby the Capitol there in Washington, D.C. And what happened afterwards was some of those supporters then went up to the US Capitol and stormed the building. Now, Donald Trump, he later referred to those responsible of storming the building as very special. And Donald Trump has now been widely accused of inciting this violence, including by members of his own party. So that in turn then saw a number of social media companies decide to either block or suspend Donald Trump's social media accounts. So if we take a look at Twitter, he's got about 89 million followers on Twitter, and Twitter has permanently suspended Donald Trump's account there. When it comes to Facebook and Instagram, both of those social media accounts are owned by Facebook. Those have been suspended until the inauguration day, which is about the 20th of January. You've got a stack of other social media companies out there as well. Another one, Ros, of course, is TikTok. They've said that they've banned videos relating to Donald Trump and his questions around the validity of that presidential election. So quite a big move to make on a world leader by these social media companies.
And here in Australia, Steffi, what's been the reaction to the president not having access to his social media accounts?
Well, the acting Prime Minister is Michael McCormack at the moment, while the Prime Minister Scott Morrison takes some leave, and he today has questioned the social media giant, saying that it really does not follow the idea of free speech. And he said that while the social media giants can do what they want, he doesn't agree with their decision. And he's gone so far as to compare it to an incident that happened just a couple of months ago. You may recall that a Chinese foreign spokesman put a photo on Twitter. It was a doctored image suggesting that Australian soldiers had hurt children in Afghanistan. Now, the Australian government asked Twitter to take that photo down, saying it was fake. That never happened. And as a result, Michael McCormack today saying how come Twitter has kept that image up but has taken down Donald Trump's Twitter account. Further to that, Ros, we've heard from the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, and he today has also said he's uneasy about what Facebook and Twitter have done.
Well, I felt pretty uncomfortable with those measures that were announced. Freedom of speech is fundamental to our society. As Voltaire said, I might not agree with what you say, but I defend the right to say it. And so those decisions were taken by commercial companies, but personally I felt uncomfortable with what they did.
Now, the opinions expressed today by senior members of the government are very different to what Labor has been saying. We've heard from the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, saying it's about time that Twitter and Facebook suspended the accounts of US President Donald Trump. So some different views today, as one can expect. But as we move forward in this century, social media is really playing a role in how we all consume news and get information. And there's a wider conversation to be had about what roles social media companies, what role law enforcement and other digital platforms have in ensuring that people are getting accurate information.
Thanks, Steffi. Democrats will start impeachment proceedings against US President Donald Trump this week after accusing him of inciting his supporters to storm the Capitol building. The siege came after a weeks-long effort by Mr. Trump to overturn November's election result, which has failed repeatedly in the courts. This report comes from Arizona, where many of the president's backers have downplayed the violence and continue to believe the polls were rigged.
Dear Lord, we ask that you watch over our president, his family.
They come to pray for their president,
Donald J. Trump,
and demand that their rights be restored.
They will never break our will.
Amen.
These supporters of Donald Trump don't recognise the result of what they believe was a stolen election, and they say they'll continue their fight to prove that.
There's only one thing that will happen that will stop these, is when Trump becomes president again.
Will you continue to come down here after Joe Biden is inaugurated on the 20th of January?
Joe Biden will not be inaugurated on the 20th of January. So I don't feel any need. I'll keep coming here until Trump is back in office.
These scenes in the nation's capital shocked America and the world. People watched a protest called by the president turn into a riot that resulted in destruction and loss of life. But one of the most high-profile protesters leading the charge called it a beautiful day. Jake Angeli spoke to me just hours before he was arrested and detained by the FBI.
My intention was to do whatever it is that my country needed me to do without fear. I had no idea that I was going to end up in the Senate, on the Senate floor and sitting in Mike Pence's chair. But the moment that I had the opportunity, I most certainly took it.
At Sammy's Mexican Grill, where Donald Trump's supporters meet and eat, what they say they saw on the 6th was a peaceful march that was infiltrated by violent members of the far left.
Somebody prepared everything. It's everybody acting.
Do you think the president was set up to look bad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
Who would set up the president to look bad?
Democrats.
Democrats?
Of course.
And I truly believe that a lot of the people that were there were probably Antifa and many of the other people that have gone to these various things and tried to create havoc.
I think it's probably some other group, because if you look at the rallies he had, there was never any violence in the rallies. And like Marie said, with the Antifa and all of that, I think they were traveling around the country causing trouble.
Joe Biden is due to be inaugurated in less than 2 weeks. A fact fervent supporters still flying the flag for Donald Trump are far from ready to face.
Thousands of people on the outskirts of Papua New Guinea's capital are facing eviction from their homes as the city struggles to support a surging population. Almost half of the residents in Port Moresby live in informal settlements, and they often don't have a legal right to the land their homes are built on. PNG correspondent Natalie Whiting reports.
Paul Sukma is actually retired from teaching, but he came back as a volunteer to run this school on the outskirts of Port Moresby.
We have well over 200. The number is increasing because of the movement of people from the city.
The school's been set up and funded by the community, but the students and the rest of the residents are now facing eviction.
We are really worried because where else can they go?
Bushwara is one of more than 200 informal or squatter settlements in Papua New Guinea's capital. A chronic shortage of affordable housing has resulted in people building homes on vacant land in the city. Many people here have been evicted from other settlements before.
After the first eviction, we slept outside, had no food, and the children didn't go to school.
Residents say the first settlers arrived here 20 years ago, and since then they've built the school, churches, stores and farms.
The pioneers of this settlement, we came here, we make a tent and we slept here.
Thousands of people now call Bushwara home.
But one of PNG's biggest superannuation funds owns most of the land that Bushwara is built on, and it wants to develop a suburb and affordable housing for its members. The settlers went to court to try to fight an eviction notice, but they lost and have been ordered to leave by March. They're planning another legal challenge.
There's no other place in the city that we can move out.
The city's governor is trying to negotiate a compromise to keep some of the land for the current residents. But this is just one of an estimated 200 settlements in the city.
45% of the land in the city is basically occupied by unplanned settlement.
With PNG's population booming, finding a solution for the people here will just be the start. Natalie Whiting, ABC News, Port Moresby.
Indonesian divers have found the 2 black boxes from a passenger plane that crashed into the Java Sea, killing all 62 people on board. Investigators have begun the slow task in recovering bodies and identifying the dead. Indonesia correspondent Ann Barker reports.
Navy ships and police boats continue to search the Java Sea a full day after Sriwijaya Air Flight 182 plunged into the ocean. Search teams have brought tons of debris back to shore, including luggage, clothing, pieces of wreckage and body parts. Navy divers found the fuselage on the sea floor, and authorities say they've located the black boxes, but are yet to retrieve them. It's still unclear what caused the crash. The Boeing 737-500 disappeared just minutes after taking off in heavy weather from Jakarta for Pontianak in West Kalimantan. Along with the 12 crew, there were 50 passengers on board, including 7 children and 3 babies. Victims' families have been asked to give DNA samples to help identify bodies from the wreckage.
Kami sudah koordinasi dengan
We are coordinating with Sriwijaya Air to provide us with all the passenger details, including seat numbers and also CCTV footage of the passengers when they were boarding.
One man whose wife was on board says she'd originally booked with a different airline altogether, but at the last minute it was changed to Sriwijaya Air.
We paid 1.4 million rupiah for the ticket, but she arrived at Jakarta airport at 4 a.m. and at check-in she was told the flight was changed to Sriwijaya Air. She was supposed to take NAM Air.
This is the first major air crash in Indonesia since a Lion Air Boeing 737 MAX plunged into the same sea minutes after takeoff 2 years ago, killing 189 people. Indonesia has one of the worst crash records in the world. Even before this latest disaster, more people had died in crashes in Indonesia than in any other country in the past decade. With a long and grim task ahead to recover bodies and wreckage, it could be days, if not weeks, before investigators know what caused the jet's catastrophic descent. Anne Barker, ABC News.
Rescuers have been buried by a landslide in Indonesia as they were searching for survivors of an earlier landslip. The rescue teams were evacuating residents from the first landslide just 3 hours earlier. At least 12 people have died and dozens are still missing. Torrential rain triggered the landslides in a village in West Java. They're common in Indonesia and are often blamed on deforestation. Queenslanders have marked 10 years since one of the darkest times in the state's history. The January 2011 floods followed weeks of record-breaking rains, with flash flooding affecting more than 3/4 of the state, an area bigger than France and Germany combined. A decade on, the emotional toll is still being felt by victims.
You know, I just cope. Every day is a different day. Every year when it comes up to we sort of have a little anniversary thing down the memorial stone down the bottom every year. That's probably a bit hard, but you just got to keep going forward. Before you know it, the water was like 3 metres high at 100 k's an hour. There's nothing you can do. You just get up on the roof and pray to God you're going to survive it. My sister rang me from Oakey and said, "Oh, you know, I was on the phone to Dad and can you go and see to him?" I said, "No, I can't get to him." She spoke to him and he spoke to 000, and we think he lost his life about 4:18 in the afternoon when the phone went dead. So,
houses floating past with people in it, massive big boats, big shipping containers. The debris was just too much.
A dead set, it was like a wall of water, and I've got a Falcon ute and it just picked it up. There's about 7 or 8 cars there and just smashed them together.
I didn't think the water could be so strong in the street.
And for about 3 weeks after, we had teams out every day searching. You know, we were searching for anything that was relevant, whether they were deceased people or possessions.
I think the majority of people have rebuilt their lives. There certainly are people in our community that do struggle, and I think the healing process will continue on for a very long time.
Time to check the weather now. Here's Nate Byrne.
The heat is on for the south of the country as a front moving well to the south of Australia drags a trough right across into the southeast. Now that's going to help draw hot air right down into Tasmania today. We're seeing temperatures rising and the fire danger following, with some gusty winds along with a pretty weak wind direction change. West to southwesterly, it's going to be quite mild, and that means we've still got some increased fire danger. Severe conditions across 4 states, WA, Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia, where we've got extreme fire danger for the lower southeast today. Not much in terms of rainfall for the mainland. Tasmania gets a bit of a drink out of this tonight as the front moves through, but further north, dry thunderstorms are the concern, especially with that fire danger increase. Keeping an eye on that. Queensland quite wet as well, and that's going to continue over the coming week. In fact, things look pretty much the same. We'll see a couple of fronts moving through, just clipping the southwest and the southeast corners, and then some falls moving up the east coast later on. But otherwise, things looking pretty settled for the most part. The monsoon not active at the moment, but still some showers and some storms around for Darwin. It's getting to 34 for Tuesday, but the rest of the capitals are looking pretty dry. 29 in Brisbane and Sydney. Canberra's got a top of 35. Melbourne, you've got a cloudy but dry day, 23 after today's heat. And Hobart, just maybe an early shower after the overnight falls. 21 will be the top. Adelaide's aiming for 32 on Tuesday, and Perth's got a mostly sunny day. It's getting to 33.